A diverse culture enriched with thousands of years of history. A culture that was the foundation of settlement and civilization in present-day Canada. A heritage that was unwithering throughout their history. Who are these potent traits describing? The Indigenous people of Canada. However, Western culture has impaired and continued to impair their legacy, plaguing their culture with stereotypes.
Let's talk about the topic of the documentary, debunking stereotypes.
Stereotypes towards Indigenous culture are degrading and fallacious. Such stereotypes depict the Indigenous community with falsehoods and spread fabricated truths about their people and culture. Stereotypes towards the Indigenous have been normalized, and its impairment towards Indigenous culture and heritage have been neglected. One such stereotype is the belief that all Indigenous groups share the same values and traditions. Many Indigenous groups pride themselves on their distinctiveness, whether that is their innovations or celebrations. To simply categorize thousands of years of distinct heritage as one is impertinent and disdainful. Indigenous culture is distinct yet alluring. In this documentary, we will be taking a glimpse at a variety of Indigenous groups and what makes these groups unique.
Let's talk about the first group of people, the Inuit community in Canada.
The Indigenous people of Canada are split into three primary groups, the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation. The history of the Indigenous people of Canada can be traced back to 14,000 years ago. However, the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation have had their history traced to different origins. Regardless, their diverse origin only further hints at the potent culture they would become. The Inuit people settled in Canada around 800 or 1,000 years ago. Their history is diverse and rich, known as nomads traveling fixated on survival. According to archaeologists, the Inuit people moved eastward from western Alaska into the northern Arctic regions of Canada as well as Greenland. Many Inuit people continue to inhabit the northern regions of Canada, such as Nunavut, as well as other regions throughout Canada. The Inuits' culture is unique, as they had to adapt to a chilling and dangerous Arctic. The Inuit pride themselves on their ability to hunt and provide, traits that are deemed admirable. As such, their people have made inventions to better their lives and aid in hunting. One such invention was the parka. The parka is a piece of traditional Inuit clothing. Designed to aid in hunting, the parka provides warmth and dryness during enduring hunts. Besides the parka, the Inuit also pioneered the invention of the harpoon, a polished spear attached to a string designed to stab and pierce fish. The harpoon has been redesigned and augmented into the harpoon we see in modern-day fishing. Hunting and feasting is at the heart of Inuit culture, with many religious rituals and ceremonies associated with hunting and feasting. The Inuit believe in animism, where all living and non-living beings have a spirit. A religious ceremony that the Inuit performed was the bladder dance. The dance indicated a successful hunt, and would perform in ceremonial houses called kashuns. The Inuit will honor the bladder of the animal where they believe the soul lied, and return it to sea, hoping it finds a new body. Although there isn't footage of the bladder dance, as it is sacred, there is other Inuit dances that resemble it. The Inuit have lived a unique lifestyle, centering their traditions and values around their religion and hunting. Their unique environment has enabled their culture to grow into the robust culture we see today.
Now let's take a look at the second group of people we will be talking about, the Métis people of Canada.
The Métis people are a community that emerged during the 18th century who live neither a quiet nor sedate lifestyle. The Métis are unique as they are born as mixed bloods, when European men and Indigenous women started having children during the Great Lakes fur trade. Initially, the Métis were born to forge a deeper connection between the Indigenous and the French. However, they have developed into their own community, living in the lower regions of Canada in places such as British Columbia, Alberta, Northwest Territories, and Ontario. As such, much of the Métis' history revolves around the fur trade and the establishment of settlement in present-day Canada. The Métis have invented their own tools and resources that have aided in the fur trade. Is the York boat. The York boat was a revolutionary invention. It allowed faster and more effective handoffs between the Indigenous and Europeans, giving the Métis an upper hand in the trade. Another revolutionary invention that was created to aid in the fur trade was the Red River Cart. The Red River Cart was used to haul heavier goods, using a mule or horse to pull the cart from the front. This discovery also aided with the buffalo hunt. The carts would allow families to travel to the hunting grounds together and reap an abundance of hides and meat. The Métis also had their own unique customs and traditions. A common gathering is known as the rendezvous. This festival includes fiddling, music, dancing, and other traditional Métis art such as finger weaving and other forms of expression. Similarly to the Inuit, the Métis have developed their own lifestyle. The Métis pride themselves on their craftsmanship and celebrations. These aspects of their culture, along with their unique origin, accentuates their distinctive heritage.
Lastly, let's talk about the biggest of the three groups, the First Nations.
Finally, the First Nations are the largest of these three indigenous groups and are recognized as anyone of indigenous descent who isn't Inuit nor Métis. Prior to colonization, the First Nations already had established their own distinct lifestyles and heritage depending on where they resided in Canada. The First Nations were divided into 6 groups. This consisted of the Woodland, Iroquois, Plains, Plateau, Pacific Coast, and Mackenzie and Yukon River basins. These 6 groups lived distinct lifestyles, with some living a nomadic lifestyle while others settled in their respective regions. Their distinctive lifestyles gave birth to various innovations. One example is the invention of the canoe. The first canoe was built by the Algonquin people, who were part of the Woodland First Nations. The birch canoe was lightweight, sturdy, and easy to construct. The canoe allowed the First Nations to travel deep or shallow waterways with ease, which allowed fishing to become a reliable source of food. Another invention that has been attributed to Westerners is the invention of hockey. However, hockey was first played by the Mi'kmaq community, who were also Woodland First Nations, before Europeans renamed the sport and popularized it. The First Nations group also had their own celebrations and rituals. Perhaps the most renowned of these traditions is the powwow. The powwow is a spiritual and social gathering that celebrates First Nation heritage and nature. The ritual is sacred and seen as a privilege, a time to rekindle friendships, dance, feast, and storytell. The celebration was created in the 1800s by the Poncas, who were part of the Plains First Nations. Nowadays, despite the harm imposed on these groups, much of their heritage has been preserved and continue to thrive. These communities have become more independent, and now there are over 630 communities in Canada. These groups speak their own languages and have their own customs.
Next, we will be talking about some local indigenous groups in our area, such as the Musqueam people.
After taking a look at the 3 main indigenous groups in Canada, there is no doubt their values and traditions are diverse and resemble the group's values and culture. When we take a closer look at the indigenous groups in our province, British Columbia, these groups also have their own unique customs and traditions. One such group are the Musqueam people. The Musqueam First Nation have inhabited the Vancouver region for thousands of years. Their culture has influenced different parts of our city and our culture. I wanted to highlight some aspects of our city that had indigenous art from local indigenous artisans. One such piece of art I found was his mural outside of Richmond Center. The work of art is an astounding 6 stories tall and was built by Musqueam artist Thomas Cannell. The art was a mural and representation of indigenous culture and symbols. The mosaic of fish, whales, and eagles under the sun, moon, and stars depict traditional iconography of the Musqueam culture. Besides the mural, these pieces of indigenous artistry were put on display at the KPU Museum. Although I couldn't find the specific artisans who created these works of art, when I visited the exhibit, they were by local artists. Another work of art was a blanket sewn outside the exhibit within KPU. The blanket was created in honor of the Truth and Reconciliation Week, modeled after the Coast Salish people. Despite these indigenous communities sharing similar values, they have managed to create a unique art style that resembles their culture and heritage.
Lastly, I talked to a classmate of mine who is from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation. I asked her a couple questions about her culture and what she thought about these racist stereotypes that impair the First Nations legacy.
Lastly, I interviewed a classmate of mine who was indigenous. Her name is Alec and is from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation. I asked her a couple questions regarding her culture as well as the impact of these negative stereotypes on her culture. Although I couldn't fit the entire conversation in this documentary, the actual conversation will be cited below. However, I will try to summarize what she said in a quintessential manner. Alec expressed an aspect of her culture she found unique and special, which was storytelling. Storytelling enables the passing of knowledge, wisdom, and allows her family members to deepen their relationship. When asked about the impact of these stereotypes on indigenous culture, she mentioned although it is important to acknowledge the differences in culture, we should treat all indigenous people the same. All indigenous people once lived together in harmony, and although things have changed, they still deserve to be treated with equality. Although it is important to address issues such as the generalization of all indigenous groups, we need to also look at the underlying issue. After this documentary, I hope it becomes apparent the differences in values and traditions that the indigenous share. By highlighting the differences in innovation, history, and celebrations between these groups, I hope it provides more insight into the distinctiveness of these groups. The Inuit, Métis, and First Nation have their respective values and traditions. They have accustomed their lifestyles to fit their environment and community. Through thousands of years of hardships, they have become the potent culture they are today. To simply group all indigenous groups and innovation together is disrespectful and degrading to their rich and paramount culture. However, as Alec mentioned, this stereotype is only one of the many issues the Indigenous face. Moving forward, as a community, a city, a country, we must reconcile our past and reciprocate the kindness the Indigenous have always shown.